Hey guys, my name is Rochelle, and something you may have noticed about me is I love IKEA. Today, I'm making a folding kitchen island using as much IKEA as possible. So we've got a bit of a problem. Oh, jeez. I don't know. Magnets, baby. Ooh, I'm excited. I have been shopping at IKEA for as long as I can remember, and I love the concept of the store. I love their furniture. I love that they have so many products available at different price points, and I love the hackability of their pieces. Get out of my mouth, hair. I feel like a news correspondent. The whims are crazy! Doing IKEA hacks is absolutely nothing new to the Sorry Girls channel. The girls were doing it long before I got here, and since joining, I have gotten to do my fair share of IKEA hacks as well. However, the projects that I've done in the past were based on necessity for a specific makeover, so the ideas really just kind of flowed naturally. But so many of you guys have small spaces that are just crying out for creative solutions, so I thought that I would challenge myself to come up with an idea from scratch that could really work in anyone's space. It's no surprise that in a small space, furniture that expands when you need it and can tuck away when you don't is crucial. I've been seeing a ton of folding tables out on the internet lately, and specifically this kind of style really caught my eye as something that would be great in a small space and renter-friendly because it's a freestanding unit. So I wanted to challenge myself to make a convertible piece of furniture, but use as much IKEA product as possible. So building something out of raw lumber, that's off the table. This might also help to create a piece that is cohesive in the end, because even though I've had luck in the past with stain matching, you know who already sells building material that's in the right finish? IKEA. I'm starting with the shortest and narrowest version of the Billy bookcase in the brown walnut finish. The idea is to first create a door front. Originally, I was going to grab a few of the long extra shelves for the wider Billy bookcase to trim them and join them together to make the perfect size door. Then, using some threaded inserts I already have and a couple of bolts from the hardware store, this door would then be able to pivot upwards to create our tabletop and back down for compact concealed storage. However, when I was perusing the as-is department, as you simply must if you're ever shopping at IKEA, I found a Haslarp chevron pattern door that was not only gorgeous, big enough to cut the entire tabletop from, looked fantastic with the walnut finish on the Billy bookcase, and was almost as inexpensive as just one shelf would have been. This was the literal perfect find, so of course my plans adapted. But how is this tabletop actually going to stay in its upright position? Well, it needs a leg, and since we're already going to use a door for a tabletop, why not use a door as a leg? Specifically, the Oxburg leg that's made for the Billy. Then we can just use the shelves that already come with the bookcase to add storage inside, and voila, we've got a folding bar table / island / coffee station / whatever you need it to be. The first step is going to be to assemble our Billy bookcase, and I think because she's so small and cute, I'm actually going to do it right here on the table. So this Haslarp door is too tall and a little bit too wide to actually fit inside the front of our Billy bookcase, so I need to make it smaller, but the problem is that this beautiful pattern on it is centered. So if I cut one section off, I'm afraid that it's going to look imbalanced. So I'm sitting here wondering if I need to cut all the sides off, shrink it down proportionately. That might have to be the move. The door has to fit inside the bookcase, so I need to cut it down smaller. But first, I need to preserve these nice edges. So I'm cutting off the factory sides of the door so I can reattach them later to hide the raw edge. So we've got a bit of a problem. To be fair though, this is an issue that I knew that we were going to come up on. I just didn't think we'd come upon it this quickly. The amount that I need to cut off the bottom of this door means I'm going to be cutting through the pre-existing hinge holes. So my plan is actually to... Oh my God, where'd my piece of wood go? I'm losing it. Why can't I do this? Because these holes are about a ½ inch deep, I've got a piece of ½ inch plywood here, and I think we can use a hole saw to cut out the appropriate size plug, if you will, to pop in there to fill up most of the hole. And that way, if we glue it down and let it dry, when we go to cut through the hole, we'll be left with a nice flat side that we can hopefully reattach the trim to. That's the idea. Let's find out if it works. I'm cutting down the length to be just under 37 inches and using masking tape to avoid chip out.
See, that's where the holes were.
Okay, that cut was not perfect. It's a little wibbly, but you know what? We'll fix it later. We'll fix it in post. I don't think that applies here. I will be fixing it later. But now we move on to cutting it down to its proper width, which I think should be easier because I can actually run it on the table saw a lot more accurately than I could the other way. So let's do that. Instead of cutting off the edges, you could use edge banding instead, but I wanted to use what came from IKEA and it already matches perfectly. I only needed to cut off 1/4 inch on each side, which will be easy on the table saw, but say you only have a circular saw, you could just cut the 1/2 inch off of one side to make your life easier. Now for attaching those edges I cut off. I'm just using some wood glue and then using masking tape to hold everything in place as it dries. And I'm just gonna use some wooden dowels to plug the smaller holes meant for the hinges. And if you don't have any of these on hand, if you check the returns department at IKEA, you might be able to find some loose that you can grab. I even found some really skinny wooden dowels in my stash to fill the hole that the hole saw made. Okay, so it's still a little bit rough, but at the very least, we do have a door that fits inside of our bookcase. So now the problem is, how do we make it so that it pivots outward into a tabletop? So we all know that math is not my strongest suit. So I was struggling to figure out how I was supposed to know where the pivot point would be. The point at which the table would pivot from being a door to being a tabletop. But I also did some testing because I wasn't sure if my theories on the pivot and hinge mechanism were all gonna be sound. I think that I've dialed in the measurements that I need to cut and where to place my holes, and I think I figured out that pivot mechanism. We'll see. So what I did was I built a sort of prototype. I popped it in here, and I think I figured out where it needs to go so that when it pivots out, it'll be straight. And then, oh geez, sound like I'm from Minnesota. Heaven help me if it's not right, because I feel like we really only have one shot of screwing into the side of this bookcase before we destroy the finish on the outside. So we better hope my calculations are correct. Never a good thing to have to rely on. I've got my measurements drawn out on both the bookcase and the tabletop for where I need to drill my pivot hole. And I've got spacers on the bottom and the inside to make sure that this is all clamped together the way it would be hanging when it's put together. So my thoughts for the pivot mechanism is that I would use these little threaded inserts on the sides of the door, and then this little sort of decorative bolt would go through the side of the bookcase, and then it would give something for the door to pivot on. Using a 3/8 inch Forstner bit for a cleaner hole, I'm drilling into the side of the tabletop so I can screw in my threaded inserts. Now that we've got our holes and threaded inserts installed in the door, we're gonna go ahead and make this hole bigger. I'm gonna use a 1/4 inch drill bit to give space for the shaft of the bolt to go through and have space to pivot. Now, it's the moment of truth. So we're gonna put our little bolt through the side of the bookcase, right? That sort of works. I think I might need some washers or something to get the spacing right, but the general mechanism pivots, so I'm happy with that. Moving on. Now it's time to figure out the leg. For all the time, if I could, then I would. Okay, I am so pleased that this pivot mechanism that we came up with here is working. That is one of the hard parts done. The leg of this table. The plan is to use an Augsburg door, which is the doors that actually go with the Billy bookcase, Problem is, because it's meant to fit perfectly on the front, it's just a little bit too wide and a little bit too long to fit behind this tabletop that we made to allow it to fold up inside. But I do love the look of the door as is. So if I could find a way to maybe pull this door apart, make it smaller and put it back together in a way that still looks really nice, that would be fantastic. However, I think I might be mathed out for the day, and I don't want to ruin this. This is the only door I've got. So I think this might be a task for tomorrow, and I will see you then. All right, back at it. So we have our plan of using the door. Now, originally I had thought maybe about joining 2 of those longer Billy shelves together, but I thought that would be just kind of chunky and really heavy. And I kind of liked the idea of a leg that had a little bit of design to it. So I think the door is gonna work for us if we can, in fact, make it smaller. And I don't just wanna be cutting off the edges to make it smaller, because then we're gonna lose a lot of the thicker material, which is what's actually structural, because this stuff is just really, really thin. So we're gonna have to find a way to pull this apart and put it back together. Okay, so my first thought was maybe I could pull this door apart, but it is actually glued together really well. And I'm afraid if I try and really get a pry bar in there, I'm going to destroy the door. So because it's got this lovely little bevel detail here, that's also making things a little bit more difficult. And if I'm being honest with you, I cannot for the life of me figure out how to make this work. So I think I'm actually just gonna start by using the table saw to cut it apart as close to this edge without touching it. So hopefully I don't mess with the finish. And then we're gonna deal with it once we've got it in pieces. I don't know. I don't know. Talk about an IKEA hack. I have literally hacked that door to pieces. I don't know how I'm gonna be able to put it back together in a way that is structurally sound, but I'm gonna find a way. I do, however, think I need to take a break. I need to step away from this for a second, get my head back on straight. So I'm actually gonna run out and do a couple errands, one of which being the solution to something that's been bothering me. This little brass screw, I am not loving the color of it. And that is something that I can, in fact, change successfully. I had to recut the groove on some pieces because bits of the middle panel were stuck in there really well. I cut the middle panel down to the size I needed and used some dowels to join the side pieces back together and add a bit more strength. Then one huge glue up later, and I'm left with my finished shrunken door. Don't you just love it when you give yourself a project as a challenge and that project turns out to be quite challenging? Love it, love it, love it, love it. Anyways, I've got the door put back together and it's smaller, and I think it might actually be the right size. Let's hope, fingers crossed. In order to turn this door into a leg that actually folds up behind the tabletop and inside the bookcase, I'm going to use these folding brackets. Now, I've used them before on my work table, on a couple of miter saw carts so that they have extendable wings, but most notably, you might remember these from the Eclectic Maximalist bedroom makeover, where I sort of hacked a mirror that had a little standing desk shelf inside for a little light work. So we're gonna use these same hinges, brackets that hinge. We are gonna use these to put together our folding table. Oh, but first, I wanted to show you guys this. I wanted to be able to cover up that raw wood of the plugs that we had done, and I had some leftover wood grain contact paper from upcycling the fan blades on my ceiling fan, so I thought I would use the Cricut to cut out a little custom shape to cover the holes. Let's see if it works. Yes, baby. I first attached the brackets to the leg using a scrap piece of wood to make sure I had the right placement. Then I drilled some pilot holes before screwing them into place. And then I repeated the process for attaching to the tabletop. Hey, our tabletop is tabletopping along with the leg, and I am so happy about that. But the fact that there's a hinge on the one side of the door means that there is a gap at the other side that is unsupported. So I had some leftover walnut plywood and I had to just make it a little bit thicker with some MDF at the back. I put some of the extra edge banding on there to make a spacer that's gonna go in between. But this is gonna serve 1, for spacing, and 2, for hopefully keeping the tabletop and the leg together. And I think I'm gonna do that with magnets. Good God, your girl loves magnets. Any opportunity to use a magnet. Come on, baby, let's go use a magnet. So I do have a little drawer full of magnets here. However, they're all too small or too weak to kind of hold this together, according to my tests. So I ordered these, and they are pretty strong, like hard to pry apart strong. So hopefully, if I embed these into that spacer piece and some into the back of our leg, then hopefully that whole piece will stay together, at least until gravity gets involved, you know? Let's try it. It's like, it can hang and it's not going anywhere. But then when you need to open it, magnets. Magnets, baby! So I think I'm gonna put this back together and see how we're doing. Okay, so you might notice that this is not the silver magnetic catch. Turns out that was way too powerful. I was struggling to get the table open with that one, so I replaced it with a piece of scrap wood that I had with just a little magnet here, and it's a much gentler hold, which is perfect because, nice, eh? Because when trying to figure out how to actually open this once it was in its closed position, I thought about adding a handle, but that would stick out, and if I didn't want it to stick out, the door would have to be inset quite a bit. So with the more gentle magnet catch, you can actually push on the corner up here, and the whole thing opens. Now, this thing needs shelves. This bookcase comes with 2 of these little shelves here. Problem is now, when you fold up the leg and then the tabletop, it takes up quite a bit of space on the inside of the bookcase. So these are much too deep now, and we've got to cut them shallower so that you can still have a little bit of shelf and storage going on in here, but your tabletop can close in front of it. So what seems easy enough is to just rip off the back of this because only the front side has a finish on it. So we want to make sure we rip off the back as much as we need to, but then the holes to hold up the shelf are on the front, and they're much too deep, so we might have to drill some new holes a little bit further in. In hindsight, if I had cut the shelves down earlier, I would have loved to use the offcuts rather than my scrap wood to make my spacer pieces for the magnets for even more IKEA upcycling. With the new holes drilled in the bookcase, I re-drilled some holes on the bottom of the shelves so I could still use the shelf pins that came with the Billy bookcase. Guys, we have a table in a bookcase. That is an absolute win for the day. Yes! I think there's just a couple little finishing touches that I'd like to do, some maybe like paint touch-ups, stain touch-ups, and then tomorrow we are gonna style it in place and see if it actually functions as we hope it functions. Ooh, I'm excited. All right, so I did make a pit stop at IKEA on the way here to grab these door pulls. And the reason I got these door pulls, even though I already said that I didn't need a door pull on the tabletop, is for the shelves. Because after I had originally gone shopping, I realized that if I was making a table out of this where you were pulling on it all the time, chances are whatever you put on the shelves inside was going to inch its way forward over time. And we don't want anything to fall off. And I thought, you know who sells door pulls? IKEA. Yep. And what better way to end off this challenge for myself than by adding one little final touch to it from IKEA. So I realized when I was looking online that these handles would actually fit perfectly across the front of the shelf as a little tipping rail. So I've got the table in place at its new home, and you wouldn't recognize this corner of the space, but you might recognize the bathroom, which was the beautiful sort of grandma chic bathroom that we did for Emma, one of our TSP members. Emma had mentioned that it might be nice to have a sort of coffee bar area here in her kitchen, but it's a little bit tight, as you can tell with the stove. So we came up with something that hopefully will solve this problem for her. A little coffee bar, a little extra prep space, a little bit of storage. I think it's gonna work out great. Let's see if it actually works. Let's see if it actually works, or have more confidence. It's gonna work, obviously it's here.
Thanks for building this. This is amazing. This is so great to have around. In the extra storage, like we do not have enough storage in this kitchen.
Yay!
Yeah.
Okay, just in case you thought maybe the oven wouldn't open, I assure you it does. Yes, it opens. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I'm so happy with how it turned out. And make sure you're subscribed because next week, Kelsey's got a stunning bedroom makeover for you. Bye.